You have to make accountability 100% one of your dating and relationship non-negotiables. And there's two reasons for this. Firstly, accountability is the absolute foundation of emotional safety in relationships. And secondly, a lack of accountability gives you a huge insight into the broader emotional landscape of the person that you are dealing with. Accountability refers to the ability of a person to take ownership of their behaviour and have an understanding of how that behaviour impacts other people around them without them being defensive, blame shifting, making excuses, and just downplaying what may have happened. And when someone's accountable, it means that they have the ability to understand the impact of their actions irrespective of whether or not there was intent to harm as a result of their behaviour. So it's the ability of someone to sit and recognise that repair is required, even if it was unintentional. So because accountability is the foundation of relational safety, and when someone is accountable, essentially what they're communicating is your experience matters and I am not above taking ownership of my behaviour and being able to own when I may have been in the wrong. Here's what accountability sounds like. I can see that I hurt you, even though it wasn't my intention. I understand that what I did upset you and I am sorry and I will work to not do that again, or some variation of that. Irrespective of how it actually comes out, it is basically communicating or demonstrating three things. Firstly, empathy, showing that someone actually understands the impact that it has had emotionally or even physically on the other person. Secondly, it is demonstrating responsibility. They're not hiding behind their intent or lack of intent to harm. It doesn't matter if there was intent or not, they are still taking ownership of what their actions or their words have done and what impact that has had on someone else. And thirdly, it's that commitment to change, the commitment to not want to do that again, the commitment to change a behaviour or an action or way they approach or interact with someone. So again, when these three things are present and accountability as a whole, it demonstrates that your experience matters and that this person has the ability to empathise, introspect, and be able to recognise when they may be in the wrong and they need to take action to make the relationship emotionally safe for both of you. So what does a lack of accountability sound or look like? It might come across or be delivered as something like, well, I don't understand why you're so upset. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to say that. Or you're being too sensitive. What this is demonstrating is deflection, invalidation, and control. Deflection comes in the form of they're focusing more on your reaction, not their behaviour. The invalidation is essentially framing your response as being over the top or irrational. So you shouldn't be reacting like that because they didn't intend to harm you or they're trying to downplay what they did. And lastly, there's that element of control. Essentially, they're trying to decide and dictate whether or not you should feel hurt in response to their behaviour, which is 100% not emotionally safe, not healthy. And it doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship. This can be friendships, family relationships, all of the above. Accountability isn't just for dating and romantic relationships. It extends into the emotional safety that we experience with everyone around us. So when accountability is present, it creates a safe space for trust and emotional safety to grow. You can increase in vulnerability. The depth of your connection becomes stronger in response to having healthy approaches to rupture and repair in relationships, because rupture and repair is a normal part of any relational dynamic. We don't want to have combative relationships all the time. Well, we don't want combative relationships in general, but rupture and repair, disagreements, there's always going to be some element of it. And it's not the absence of rupture and repair that really dictates the quality of a relationship. What dictates the quality of a relationship is how effectively two people can repair a rupture if it does present. And so when accountability isn't present, it essentially begins to erode relational and emotional safety. And if it's in a relationship dynamic, you will often see the same issues playing out over and over and over again, eventually wearing you down, and it completely erodes any sense of trust that you have in this person, but also in yourself. And then you can actually start to feel like you're the problem for having emotions. And this is where control, manipulation, and gaslighting can actually come into the equation as well. Now, accountability doesn't have to be perfect. We are all works in progress, but being able to sit with the discomfort of listening to how your actions or behaviors or your words have impacted someone else, and instead of getting defensive and just reacting, you will sit and listen and try and understand, and then you will respond. There is a big difference between reactions and responses. And often when there's mutual accountability present, both people after a rupture and repair can come back together and both reflect and be like, well, I should have handled this better. I could have done X, Y, Z. And the other person also might acknowledge, well, I understand what I did or what I said, how it affected you. I think in future I might be able to improve on that by doing A, B, C. It's never just a one-way street. Accountability and healthy relational dynamics are a two-way street. But if you are one person in a relationship who is being accountable and being emotionally vulnerable and being emotionally present, and then your other half is or has a complete inability to be accountable, they're always defensive, they're always deflecting, they're unable to have any form of conflict because they just freeze or melt down, whatever it is, that's not a healthy relationship dynamic. So why do people avoid accountability in the first place? There's a number of reasons for this. A large part of it can just be general emotional immaturity and arrested development. That is where you will often see it play out quite a lot, especially in those with avoidant attachment styles. And then going a little bit deeper as to the specific elements that will comprise this, and I'm not saying that it's only avoidance that have the ability to not be accountable. Everyone and anyone does. It's oftentimes in relational dynamics, at least in my experience and through the studies that I'm undertaking, that it seems to play out a little bit more frequently in those. But there are always exceptions to the rule. So some of the deeper elements that are at play when someone has an inability to be accountable are more deep-seated fears, essentially that fear of or being scared of being wrong, and it makes them, they're worried about being seen as bad or unworthy. And then tied into this is some of those deeper shame wounds. So admitting that they have done something wrong, they see that almost as an entire attack on who they are as a person. And that's where the difference between guilt and shame come into play. Guilt is, I did something wrong. Shame is, I am something wrong. Big difference between the two. And those with those really deep-seated shame wounds, which historically I have been, if you have those deep-seated shame wounds, you will do everything and anything to avoid having to dive into that and open that wound. So this is where that lack of accountability comes into play. You don't want to open any of that Pandora's box, so you avoid it. Not healthy for the person on the receiving end of it, not by any stretch. And another thing that plays out, which is so common, is just emotional dysregulation. So for some people who, again, have that real inability to deal with conflict, to sit with emotions, to be able to hear someone, they can go into a completely dysregulated state and essentially shut down. And so when they are in this dysregulated state, they are reacting instead of responding. So oftentimes they will react defensively even before they have processed what has been said. So you might even just lead in with, I'm really upset that you did, and then it just turns into white noise for them. They may not hear anything else that you say after that because they just go into that internal shame loop of, I am something wrong, I've done something wrong, I can't handle this, I'm a shit person, I'm blah, blah, blah. All of their shame narratives start playing out, and they can spiral internally, even with something that's seemingly innocuous. I'm just a bit upset, babe, that blah, blah, blah happened. Poof, off they go. And another thing that also comes into play, and it is all interrelated, is it can often be a learnt behaviour, especially if we are dealing with people that have a history of childhood trauma or exposures to chronic relational distress. So with the learnt behaviour, it doesn't always have to be from childhood, but it oftentimes is. So with the learnt behaviour, oftentimes it might have been growing up in environments that were overly punitive. So even small things that they did wrong were met with quite severe consequences. So off the back of that, they would just try and hide, and I did not do anything wrong, so I could avoid getting into trouble. So that's one element that it can be learned. But in another way, it can be, especially if there's some of the narcissistic traits that might be floating around in some of the parents, it's owning up to mistakes can be seen as weak. And then when you tie that all in together, so you've got these learnt behaviours, you've got these deep internal shame wounds, you've got this inability to emotionally regulate, it just plays into some people being so exceptionally emotionally immature and unable to handle conflict. And if someone isn't able to be accountable, they're not able to empathise with you. And empathy is huge. It is so essential for healthy relationships. And like I said earlier, it's not always the person on the other side of the street that needs to improve on this. We are all a work in progress, and there's things that we can do to improve accountability with ourselves. And then there's also things that we can do to try and invite accountability from those that we are dealing with. So 3 of the main things that I have found I needed to work on when I was improving my ability to be accountable were very much pausing. So practice pausing before you respond. Really listen to what the other person is saying. And sometimes it might even be paraphrasing it and rephrasing it back to them. Okay, so what I'm hearing is, when I did this, it made you feel X, Y, Z. So it allows you, or me, to emotionally register what the experience was and link the two together. So that pause before reacting is so invaluable for when you are having any emotionally, it doesn't even have to be an emotionally charged conversation, but any conversation that should be inviting vulnerability. Pausing and really listening before you respond makes such an immense difference to allowing the other person to feel seen and heard. Now, the other thing is, so many people are just hell-bent on avoiding discomfort at all costs. And I think one of the biggest things that people fail to recognize is when we avoid discomfort in ourselves by not raising concerns when they come up, not voicing our opinions, not actually being honest with someone because we are wanting to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. When we avoid discomfort, we inadvertently push that discomfort onto everyone around us that is impacted by it. So in us trying to avoid the discomfort, we actually take our discomfort and give it to someone else, which is not fair because it's ours. It is not theirs to carry. So especially when we're dealing with those with very avoidant attachment styles, or those that are just generally conflict avoidant, and this is where people pleasing can come into the equation as well. So if you are a very entrenched people pleaser and you are avoiding having difficult conversations because it's too uncomfortable for you, and you're letting something persist that really needs attention and change, but you are just that uncomfortable with that situation, you don't want to raise anything. Again, you are taking that discomfort that is yours and giving it to someone else. Not fair. So we need to get comfortable with discomfort. So it can be so anxiety inducing to raise the topic or start the conversation, but I can almost guarantee you will feel infinitely better afterwards, because if you don't, it just sits there and festers, and then you also gift it to other people that don't deserve it. But getting comfortable with that little bit of discomfort. So I'm a recovering people pleaser, and again, with my quite severe history of fearful avoidance, conflict was something that I avoided like the plague. So it's taken a lot of work to get there. But being able to sit with the discomfort and slowly work through the conversations that are a little bit uncomfortable, it does make such a difference to your interpersonal relationships. And one thing I think so many people need to understand is owning your impact, or owning the impact of your behavior on those around you. It doesn't make you a bad person, and it won't destroy you. It actually will strengthen the relationships with you and those around you. So it does the opposite of what you're afraid it will do. So if I own up to this, if I acknowledge this, it's going to destroy the relationship. More often than not, there are always exceptions to the rule, but more often than not, it will strengthen the relationship by not having the uncomfortable conversation, by not being honest, by not being accountable. That is what is actually going to destroy the relationship. And lastly, and this one will, for some people, take a little bit more work. This is where you really need to try and shift that internal shame voice of, I'm a bad person, I'm a shit human because I have done X, Y, Z, and separating you and your identity from what happened. I am a good person who did something that wasn't overly nice or kind, or it doesn't mean that you are a bad person. So separating you and your identity from the behavior. If you continue to persist in behaviors that may potentially be abusive, that might be a different story. But for the most part, most people are good humans, and good humans can still do dumb shit that hurt people. But it is your ability to own it and be accountable for it and try and make amends and change your behavior. That is what makes you a good person, even if you have done something that is a little bit stupid or hurtful. And so how can you invite accountability from others or those around you? One thing that does help but can be a little bit hard, and this is where that pausing before you actually respond can come into play. It might be something like, I'm not trying to accuse you, or I'm not saying that you are the worst person in the world. I am just trying to feel understood, and I want you to understand how what you did impacted me, because I don't feel seen and I don't feel heard in this. And having boundaries, and boundaries, again, I understand they can be quite difficult. So starting with baby boundaries, but having boundaries. So if someone is continually failing to show up with a level of accountability that is fostering emotional safety, holding a boundary like, I can't keep having this same conversation with you, and I don't feel like I need to keep explaining to you how this repeated behavior continues to hurt me. And we really need to pay attention to the patterns. If you are continually raising something that is a problem, that is emotionally harmful to you, or whatever the behavior is and whatever the emotional impact is, and that person continues to repeat this, that's not a once-off or a rough patch. That's a red flag. So we always need to pay attention to patterns, and actions outstrip words every day of the week. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of an insight into why accountability is so important, how we can hopefully foster it and invite it from others, and why we need to pay attention to if it's there. And I won't advise you on what to do if it's not there, but for me, it is a deal breaker if it's not there. I will 100% emotionally distance myself, even physically distance myself from people who are not able to show up with accountability, because I don't have time for that shit anymore, and neither should you. Accountability. Hi. Hey, puppy. Hello. Hello. What you doing? Yeah.